Chapter 12. The Bab's Journey from Kashan to Tabriz. Attended by his escort, the Bab proceeded in the direction of Qum. A footnote says, the site of the second most sacred shrine in Persia and the burial place of many of her kings, among them Fath Ali and Muhammad Shah. His alluring charm, combined with a compelling dignity and unfailing benevolence, had by this time completely disarmed and transformed his guards. They seemed to have abdicated all their rights and duties, and to have resigned themselves to his will and pleasure. In their eagerness to serve and please him, they one day remarked, "We are strictly forbidden by the government to allow you to enter the city of Qum, and have been ordered to proceed by an unfrequented route directly to Tehran. We have been particularly directed to keep away from the Haram-i Masumi, that inviolable sanctuary under whose shelter the most notorious criminals are immune from arrest." A footnote here says, "At Qum are deposited the remains of his, Imam Riza's sister, Fatimi-i Masumi, i.e. the Immaculate, who, according to one account, lived and died here, having fled from Baghdad to escape the persecution of the caliphs. According to another, sickened and died at Qum on her way to see her brother at Tus. He, for his part, is believed by the pious Shias to return the compliment by paying her a visit every Friday from his shrine at Mashhad." From Lord Curzon's Persia and the Persian Question, Volume 2, page 8. We are ready, however, to ignore utterly for your sake whatever instructions we have received. If it be your wish, we shall unhesitatingly conduct you through the streets of Qum and enable you to visit its holy shrine. "The heart of the true believer is the throne of God," observed the Bab. "He who is the ark of salvation and the Almighty's impregnable stronghold is now journeying with you through this wilderness. I prefer the way of the country rather than to enter this unholy city. The Immaculate One, whose remains are interred within this shrine, her brother and her illustrious ancestors, no doubt bewail the plight of this wicked people. With their lips they pay homage to her, by their acts they heap dishonor upon her name. Outwardly they serve and reverence her shrine, inwardly they disgrace her dignity." Such lofty sentiments had instilled such confidence in the hearts of those who accompanied the Bab, that had he at any time chosen to turn away suddenly and leave them, no one among his guards would have felt in the least perturbed, or would have attempted to pursue him. Proceeding by a route that skirted the northern end of the city of Qum, they halted at the village of Qumrud, which was owned by a relative of Muhammad Beg, and the inhabitants of which all belonged to the sect of the Aliyullahi. At the invitation of the headman of the village, the Bab tarried one night in that place, and was touched by the warmth and spontaneity of the reception which those simple folk had accorded him. Ere he resumed his journey, he invoked the blessings of the Almighty in their behalf, and cheered their hearts with assurances of his appreciation and love. After a march of 2 days from that village, they arrived on the afternoon of the 8th day after Nowruz at the fortress of Kinagird, which lies 6 farsangs to the south of Tehran. They were planning to reach the capital on the ensuing day, and had decided to spend the night in the neighborhood of that fortress, when a messenger unexpectedly arrived from Tehran, bearing a written order from Haji Mirza Akazi to Muhammad Beg. That message instructed him to proceed immediately with the Bab to the village of Kulain, where Sheikh-i-Kulaini, Muhammad ibn-i Yaqub, the author of the Usul-i-Kafi, who was born in that place, had been laid to rest with his father, and whose shrines are greatly honored by the people of that neighborhood. Muhammad Beg was commanded, in view of the unsuitability of the houses in that village, to pitch a special tent for the Bab, and keep the escort in its neighborhood, pending the receipt of further instructions. On the morning of the 9th day after Nowruz, the 11th day of the month of Rabi'uth Thani, in the year AH 1263, the 29th of March, AD 1847, in the immediate vicinity of that village, which belonged to Haji Mirza Akazi, a tent which had served for his own use whenever he visited that place was erected for the Bab on the slopes of a hill pleasantly situated amid wide stretches of orchards and smiling meadows. The peacefulness of that spot, the luxuriance of its vegetation, and the unceasing murmur of its streams greatly pleased the Bab. He was joined 2 days after by Sayyid Hussein-i Yazdi, Sayyid Hassan, his brother, Mullah Abdul Karim, and Sheikh Hassan-i Zunusi, all of whom were invited to lodge in the immediate surroundings of his tent. On the 14th day of the month of Rabi'uth Thani, the 1st of April, AD 1847, the 12th day after Nowruz, Mullah Mihdi-i Kui and Mullah Muhammad Midi-i Kandi arrived from Tehran. The latter, who had been closely associated with Baha'u'llah in Tehran, had been committed by him to present to the Bab a sealed letter, together with certain gifts which, as soon as they were delivered into his hands, provoked in his soul sentiments of unusual delight. His face glowed with joy as he overwhelmed the bearer with marks of his gratitude and favor. That message, received at an hour of uncertainty and suspense, imparted solace and strength to the Bab. It dispelled the gloom that had settled upon his heart, and imbued his soul with the certainty of victory. The sadness which had long lingered upon his face, and which the perils of his captivity had served to aggravate, visibly diminished. He no longer shed those tears of anguish which had streamed so profusely from his eyes ever since the days of his arrest and departure from Shiraz. The cry, "Beloved, my well-beloved," which, in his bitter grief and loneliness, he was wont to utter, gave way to expressions of thanksgiving and praise, of hope and triumph. The exultation which glowed upon his face never forsook him until the day when the news of the great disaster which befell the heroes of Sheikh Tabasi again beclouded the radiance of his countenance and dimmed the joy of his heart. I have heard Mullah Abdul Karim recount the following incident. My companions and I were fast asleep in the vicinity of the tent of the Bab when the trampling of horsemen suddenly awakened us. We were soon informed that the tent of the Bab was vacant, and that those who had gone out in search of him had failed to find him. We heard Muhammad Beg remonstrate with the guards. "Why feel disturbed?" he pleaded. "Are not his magnanimity and nobleness of soul sufficiently established in your eyes to convince you that he will never, for the sake of his own safety, consent to involve others in embarrassment? He, no doubt, must have retired in the silence of this moonlit night to a place where he can seek undisturbed communion with God. He will unquestionably return to his tent. He will never desert us." In his eagerness to reassure his colleagues, Muhammad Beg set out on foot along the road leading to Tehran. I too, with my companions, followed him. Shortly after, the rest of the guards were seen, each on horseback, marching behind us. We had covered about a maidan when, by the dim light of the early dawn, we discerned in the distance the lonely figure of the Bab. He was coming towards us from the direction of Tehran. "Do you believe me to have escaped?" were his words to Muhammad Beg as he approached him. "Far be it from me," was the instant reply as he flung himself at the feet of the Bab, "to entertain such thoughts." Muhammad Beg was too much awed by the serene majesty which that radiant face revealed that morning to venture any further remark. A look of confidence had settled upon his countenance. His words were invested with such transcendent power that a feeling of profound reverence wrapped our very souls. No one dared to question him as to the cause of so remarkable a change in his speech and demeanor, nor did he himself choose to allay our curiosity and wonder. For a fortnight the Bab tarried in that spot. The tranquillity which he enjoyed amidst those lovely surroundings was rudely disturbed by the receipt of a letter which Muhammad Shah himself addressed to the Bab, and which was composed in these terms: "Much as we desire to meet you, we find ourselves unable, in view of our immediate departure from our capital, to receive you befittingly in Tehran. We have signified our desire that you be conducted to Maku, and have issued the necessary instructions to Ali Khan, the warden of the castle, to treat you with respect and consideration. It is our hope and intention to summon you to this place upon our return to the seat of our government, at which time we shall definitely pronounce our judgment. We trust that we have caused you no disappointment, and that you will at no time hesitate to inform us in case any grievances befall you. We fain would hope that you will continue to pray for our well-being and for the prosperity of our realm." Dated Rabi'uth Thani, AH 1263. which was the 19th of March to the 17th of April, AD 1847. Haji Mirza Akazi was no doubt responsible for having induced Muhammad Shah to address such a communication to the Bab. He was actuated solely by a sense of fear, lest the contemplated interview should rob him of his position of unquestioned preeminence in the affairs of the state and should lead eventually to his overthrow from power. A footnote here says, according to Haji Muinnuz Sultani's narrative, page 129, the chief motive which actuated Haji Mirza Akazi to urge Muhammad Shah to order the banishment of the Bab to Azerbaijan was the fear lest the promise which the Bab had given to the sovereign that he would cure him of his illness were he to allow him to be received in Tehran should be fulfilled. He felt sure that should the Bab be able to effect a cure, the Shah would fall under the influence of his prisoner and would cease to confer upon his prime minister the honors and benefits which he exclusively enjoyed. He entertained no feelings of malice or resentment towards the Bab. He finally succeeded in persuading his sovereign to transfer so dreaded an opponent to a remote and sequestered corner of his realm, and was thus able to relieve his mind of a thought that continually obsessed him. How stupendous was his mistake, how grievous his blunder! Little did he realize at that moment that by his incessant intrigues he was withholding from his king and country the incomparable benefits of a divine revelation which alone had the power to deliver the land from the appalling state of degradation into which it had fallen. By this act, that short-sighted minister did not only withhold from Muhammad Shah the supreme instrument with which he could have rehabilitated a fast declining empire, but also deprived him of that spiritual agency which could have enabled him to establish his undisputed ascendancy over the peoples and nations of the earth. By his folly, his extravagance and perfidious counsels, he undermined the foundations of the state, lowered its prestige, sapped the loyalty of its subjects, and plunged them into an abyss of misery. Incapable of being admonished by the example of his predecessors, he contemptuously ignored the demands and interests of the people, pursued with unremitting zeal his designs for personal aggrandizement, and by his profligacy and extravagance involved his country in ruinous wars with its neighbors. Sa'd-i-Ma'ad, who was neither of royal blood nor invested with authority, attained, through the uprightness of his conduct and his unsparing devotion to the cause of Muhammad, so exalted a station that to the present day the chiefs and rulers of Islam have continued to reverence his memory and to praise his virtues. Whereas Buzurgmir, the ablest, the wisest, and most experienced administrator among the viziers of Nushiravan-i-Azil, in spite of his commanding position, eventually was publicly disgraced, was thrown into a pit, and became the object of the contempt and the ridicule of the people. He bewailed his plight and wept so bitterly that he finally lost his sight. Neither the example of the former nor the fate of the latter seemed to have awakened that self-confident minister to the perils of his own position. He persisted in his thoughts until he too forfeited his rank, lost his riches, and sank into abasement and shame. The numerous properties which he forcibly seized from the humble and law-abiding subjects of the Shah, the costly furnitures with which he embellished them, the vast expenditures of labor and treasure which he ordered for their improvement, all were irretrievably lost 2 years after he had issued his decree condemning the Bab to a cruel incarceration in the inhospitable mountains of Azerbaijan. All his possessions were confiscated by the state. He himself was disgraced by his sovereign, was ignominiously expelled from Tehran, and fell a prey to disease and poverty. Bereft of hope and sunk in misery, he languished in Karbala until the hour of his death. The Bab was accordingly ordered to proceed to Tabriz. The same escort, under the command of Muhammad Beg, attended him on his journey to the northwestern province of Azerbaijan. He was allowed to select one companion and one attendant from among his followers to be with him during his sojourn in that province. He selected Sayyid Hussein-i Yazdi and Sayyid Hassan, his brother. he refused to expend on himself the funds provided by the government for the expense of that journey. All the allowances that were given by the state he bestowed upon the poor and needy, and devoted to his own private needs the money which he, as a merchant, had earned in Bushir and Shiraz. As orders had been given to avoid entering the towns in the course of the journey to Tabriz, a number of the believers of Qazvin, informed of the approach of their beloved leader, set out for the village of Siyad-Dihan, and were there able to meet him. One of them was Mullah Iskandar, who had been delegated by Hujat to visit the Bab in Shiraz and to investigate his cause. The Bab commissioned him to deliver the following message to Suleiman Khan-i-Afshar, who was a great admirer of the late Sayyid Kazim. He whose virtues the late Sayyid unceasingly extolled, and to the approach of whose revelation he continually alluded, is now revealed. I am that promised one. Arise and deliver me from the hand of the oppressor. When the Bab entrusted this message to Mullah Iskandar, Suleiman Khan was in Zanjan and was preparing to leave for Tehran. Within the space of 3 days that message reached him. He failed, however, to respond to that appeal. 2 days later, a friend of Mullah Iskandar had acquainted Hujat, who, at the instigation of the ulamas of Zanjan, had been incarcerated in the capital with the appeal of the Bab. Hujat immediately instructed the believers of his native city to undertake whatever preparations were required and to collect the necessary forces to achieve the deliverance of their master. He urged them to proceed with caution and to attempt at an appropriate moment to seize and carry him away to whatever place he might desire. These were shortly joined by a number of believers from Qazvin and Tehran, who set out according to the directions of Hujat to execute the plan. They overtook the guards at the hour of midnight, and finding them fast asleep, approached the Bab and begged him to flee. The mountains of Azerbaijan too have their claims, was his confident reply as he lovingly advised them to abandon their project and return to their homes. Approaching the gate of Tabriz, Muhammad Beg, feeling that the hour of his separation from his prisoner was at hand, besought his presence and with tearful eyes begged him to overlook his shortcomings and transgressions. The journey from Isfahan, he said, has been long and arduous. I have failed to do my duty and serve you as I ought. I crave your forgiveness and pray you to vouchsafe me your blessings. Be assured, the Bab replied, I account you a member of my fold. They who embrace my cause will eternally bless and glorify you, will extol your conduct and exalt your name. The rest of the guards followed the example of their chief, implored the blessings of their prisoner, kissed his feet, and with tears in their eyes bade him a last farewell. To each the Bab expressed his appreciation of his devoted attentions and assured him of his prayers in his behalf. Reluctantly they delivered him into the hands of the governor of Tabriz, the heir to the throne of Muhammad Shah. To those with whom they were subsequently brought in contact, these devoted attendants of the Bab and eyewitnesses of his superhuman wisdom and power recounted with awe and admiration the tale of those wonders which they had seen and heard, and by this means helped to diffuse in their own way the knowledge of the new revelation. The news of the approaching arrival of the Bab at Tabriz bestirred the believers in that city. They all set out to meet him, eager to extend to so beloved a leader their welcome. The officials of the government, into whose custody the Bab was to be delivered, refused to allow them to draw near and to receive his blessings. One youth, however, unable to restrain himself, rushed forth barefooted to the gate of the city, and, in his impatience to gaze upon the face of his beloved, ran out a distance of half a farsang towards him. As he approached the horsemen, who were marching in advance of the Bab, he joyously welcomed them, and seizing the hem of the garment of one among them, devoutly kissed his stirrups. Ye are the companions of my well-beloved, he tearfully exclaimed. I cherish you as the apple of my eye. His extraordinary behavior, the intensity of his emotion, amazed them. They immediately granted him his request to attain the presence of his master. As soon as his eyes fell upon him, a cry of exultation broke from his lips. He fell upon his face and wept profusely. The Bab dismounted from his horse and put his arms around him, wiped away his tears, and soothed the agitation of his heart. Of all the believers of Tabriz, that youth alone succeeded in offering his homage to the Bab and in being blessed by the touch of his hand. All the others had perforce to content themselves with a distant glimpse of their beloved, and with that view sought to satisfy their longing. When the Bab arrived at Tabriz, he was conducted to one of the chief houses in that city, which had been reserved for his confinement. A detachment of the Nasiri regiment stood guard at the entrance of his house. With the exception of Syed Hussein and his brother, neither the public nor his followers were allowed to meet him. The same regiment, which had been recruited from among the inhabitants of Khamsi, and upon which special honours had been conferred, was subsequently chosen to discharge the volley that caused his death. The circumstances of his arrival had stirred the people in Tabriz profoundly. A tumultuous concourse of people had gathered to witness his entry into the city. Some were impelled by curiosity, others were earnestly desirous of ascertaining the veracity of the wild reports that were current about him, and still others were moved by their faith and devotion to attain his presence and to assure him of their loyalty. As he walked along the streets, the acclamations of the multitude resounded on every side. The great majority of the people who beheld his face greeted him with a shout of Allahu Akbar. Others loudly glorified and cheered him. A few invoked upon him the blessings of the Almighty. Others were seen to kiss reverently the dust of his footsteps. Such was the clamour which his arrival had raised that a crier was ordered to warn the populace of the danger that awaited those who ventured to seek his presence. Whosoever shall make any attempt to approach the Syed Bab, went forth the cry, or seek to meet him, all his possessions shall forthwith be seized, and he himself condemned to perpetual imprisonment. A brief footnote: Allahu Akbar means God is the most great. On the day after the Bab's arrival, Haji Muhammad Taqi-i Milani, a noted merchant of the city, ventured, together with Haji Ali Asghar, to interview the Bab. They were warned by their friends and well-wishers that by such an attempt they would not only be risking the loss of their possessions, but would also be endangering their lives. They refused, however, to heed such counsels. As they approached the door of the house in which the Bab was confined, they were immediately arrested. Syed Hassan, who at that moment was coming out from the presence of the Bab, instantly intervened. "I am commanded by the Syed Bab," he vehemently protested, "to convey to you this message: suffer these visitors to enter, inasmuch as I myself have invited them to meet me." I have heard Haji Ali Asghar testify to the following. This message immediately silenced the oppressors. We were straightway ushered into his presence. He greeted us with these words: "These miserable wretches who watch at the gate of my house have been destined by me as a protection against the onrush of the multitude who throng around the house. They are powerless to prevent those whom I desire to meet from attaining my presence." For about 2 hours we tarried with him. As he dismissed us, he entrusted me with 2 cornelian ringstones, instructing me to have carved on them the 2 verses which he had previously given to me, to have them mounted and brought to him as soon as they were ready. He assured us that at whatever time we desired to meet him, no one would hinder our admittance to his presence. Several times I ventured to go to him in order to ascertain his wish regarding certain details connected with the commission with which he had entrusted me. Not once did I encounter the slightest opposition on the part of those who are guarding the entrance of his house. Not one offensive word did they utter against me, nor did they seem to expect the slightest remuneration for their indulgence. I recall how, in the course of my association with Mullah Hussein, I was impressed by the many evidences of his perspicacity and extraordinary power. I was privileged to accompany him on his journey from Shiraz to Mashhad, and visited with him the towns of Yazd, Tabas, Bushrui, and Turbat. I deplored in those days the sadness of my failure to meet the Bab in Shiraz. "Grieve not," Mullah Hussein confidently assured me. "The Almighty is no doubt able to compensate you in Tabriz for the loss you have sustained in Shiraz. Not once, but 7 times can he enable you to partake of the joy of his presence, in return for the one visit which you have missed." I was amazed at the confidence with which he uttered those words. not until the time of my visit to the BAB in Tabriz, when, despite adverse circumstances, I was on several occasions admitted into his presence, did I recall those words of Mullah Hussein, and marvel at his remarkable foresight. How great was my surprise when, on my 7th visit to the BAB, I heard him speak these words: "Praise be to God, who has enabled you to complete the number of your visits, and who has extended to you his loving protection." Chapter 13. The Bab's